Anyway, it's great for everybody to be here today. It's such a lovely day. It's too bad the government had to ruin it for us with the income tax. When this country was started, it was started, people were protesting taxes. Now that Washington is trying to tell us that paying taxes is patriotic. Well, the people that started this country, they didn't want to pay taxes, and they fought a war not to pay taxes. That's patriotism. And they were rebelling against taxation without representation. Taxation with representation, that's not so good either, especially when it's excessive. Our founders didn't realize how good they had it under the King of England. If they had known, if the people who were protesting and throwing tea in Boston Harbor, if they realized that if they left the English, that the Continental Congress would impose an income tax, we never would have left. And in fact, we probably would have been better off. Look at, if we had stayed a British colony all these years, look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong was a British colony up until 13 years ago. And during all that time, they never imposed an income tax on Hong Kong. Well, we did it to ourselves. We amended the Constitution so we can give ourselves an income tax. But I guess the good news is if we did it to ourselves, we can undo it. But of course, we all know from the Tea Parties that it's not just the taxes that are the problem. It's the spending. Look at how much money the government is now spending. The budget for the next fiscal year is $3.8 trillion in 1 year. That's almost $4 trillion. In fact, it's probably going to be $4 trillion. That is more than twice what the government spent when George Bush first took office 10 years ago. Twice. Now, how many people here thought the government was too big 10 years ago? Well, it's doubled in size. How can we possibly afford this big government? How many people are earning twice what they earned 10 years ago? Anybody? Well, how can we pay the government twice as much? And the bigger problem is, even though the government is going to spend $3.8 trillion, they're only, and the only is in quotes, they're only taxing us $2.4 trillion. Where's the difference coming from? The government is spending $1.60 for every dollar they collect. Who's going to pay that extra 60 cents? We are, with interest. It's going to cost us more money because they don't have a balanced budget. And how are we going to pay for this? Well, there's only two ways. Either we're going to have the biggest tax increase in world history, or we're going to have runaway inflation. But those are the only two options. And actually, inflation is the worst, because that's going to wipe out everybody's savings, everybody's pensions, the value of everybody's wages, unless we do something to put an end to it. If you want to reduce the spending in Washington, there's only one way that I know to do it, and that's to send me there as your senator. And I don't want to just talk about cutting government. I want to do it. And I'll tell you how I'm going to do it, because it's actually really simple. We have something called a debt ceiling, a federal debt ceiling. Only it's not really a ceiling, because every time we get near it, Congress votes to raise it. Last time they raised it by about $2 trillion, and now the debt limit is about $14 trillion, and we're going to blow through that debt limit probably right about the time that I'll be entering the Senate. Well, how about if we don't raise it? What if we actually make it a real ceiling? Then the spending grinds to a halt. Because if they can't borrow, they can't spend. We don't need a balanced budget amendment. That's too difficult. All the states have to ratify it. We don't need to repeal anything, because we can't repeal anything unless President Obama signs it. He's not going to repeal anything. But if we don't raise the debt ceiling, they can't spend our money. They have to cut. They have no choice. And in the past, there have been some Republicans who have threatened this, who have said, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling, who have threatened to filibuster. But they've always backed down, because Democrats have said, well, then we're going to shut down the government. Well, you know what? That threat's not going to work on me. Shut down the government. Because if we don't shut down the government's going to shut down the country. And then, if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then our leaders are going to have to do what they don't have the political guts to do, and that is cut government spending. Because if we don't cut government spending, it's every one of us that's going to get a pay cut, because we're going to have to suffer a tax increase. And I don't know about you, but I'm paying enough taxes. And if the government is spending twice as much money as it was spending 10 years ago, the country was here 10 years ago. How did we get by? Why do we need twice as much government? We don't need it. Government is just a growth industry, except it's growing like a cancer. And like a cancer, it has to feed off of the healthy economy to survive, and it's sucking all the life out of the private sector. There is no way that we can afford this size government. If people want to understand, why can't they get a job? Because all the capital necessary to employ them is diverted to Washington. Washington is where all the jobs are. But we don't want jobs in Washington. They don't make us more productive. They make us less productive. When people have private sector jobs, I don't have to pay their salary. But when they work for government, I do. And I don't want the services that they provide, because most of the services are simply making the economy less efficient and less productive. So what we need now is another American revolution. And hopefully this Tea Party movement can provide us with the manpower to actually achieve this revolution. Only we're not revolting against the English. It's against some of our own countrymen who are occupied Washington and the White House. We now have a president who believes that the only reason that socialism hasn't worked in the past is because the wrong people were in charge. He thinks that he's smarter than Fidel Castro, that he cares more, and that those principles will work here when they didn't work in Cuba or they didn't work in the Soviet Union. Well, I got news for him. They won't work in America either. The only thing that works is capitalism and freedom and free markets and liberty and sound money, and that's what we need. And a lot of people, people will credit me for forecasting the financial crisis of 2008, the economic crisis. Well, the problem is the crisis is not over. It didn't end. It began in 2008. The real crisis lies ahead. I've said that I want to serve one term in the United States Senate. And the main reason I want one term is 6 years is all we've got. If we can't solve these problems in 6 years, it's too late. We can't continue to grow this government and pile more regulation on this economy for another 6 years and expect there to be a viable economy at the end. We can already see this. There was an article that was in Business Week. It was about a month ago. I don't know if anyone read it. I had it up on my website. But they were interviewing students, top MBA students at American universities. And where most of them wanted to go now, it's not Silicon Valley and it's not Wall Street. Where they want to go is Shanghai. They want to go to Hong Kong. They want to leave the country. They want jobs overseas because that's where the opportunity is. And the most disturbing part of this article, and it's something I actually forecast would happen in one of my books, the most disturbing part is that the Americans who want to leave the most, the young Americans, these are hardworking, bright Americans, the ones who want to leave are children of immigrants, Asian Americans, Chinese Americans, Indian Americans, whose parents came here in search of opportunity. And you know what? Their kids want to leave for the same reason. They're looking for opportunity and they can't find it here. And the reason they can't is because of our government, because of Washington, D.C. People say, we talk about this $13, $14 trillion debt. Some politicians say that we're leaving it to our children. We're not. Our children are going to leave it to us because they're going to leave the country and they're going to stick us with the debt. The national debt does not have a 30-year maturity. We're not funding our debt with Treasury bonds, it's with Treasury bills. We've got an adjustable rate mortgage and it's got a teaser rate and it matures in the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to be stuck with these bills and they are enormous. So we need somebody to go to Washington, and I'm willing to do it if you'll send me there. And I'll be the voice of the Tea Party in Washington, D.C., and put an end to what's going on in Washington before they put an end to everything this country stands for. Anyway, I'd really appreciate your support in this race. And, at SchiffForSenate.com, if anybody wants to get some information on my campaign. I know we've got some of the staffers here who work hard. I think I've got one of my staffers is here who came all the way from Norway to work on this campaign. That's how important this campaign is. It's not only America who cares, but the entire world who cares about American capitalism and American freedom and knows that our country is in danger and wants to do what they can to help it because they know what our country stands for, or more importantly, what it stood for, and we need to take it back. Thank you.